Yo, what up, YouTube? It's your man Roberto Flack here, and we're about to wrap up 2010. Very interesting year for boxing. Had a lot of great fights, some disappointments, but I don't think there's a year in boxing where we don't get disappointments. So, nevertheless, man, this video, real quick, is my pick for 2010's Fighter of the Year. Now, I think in in the last couple of years, Manny Pacquiao has won the award, rightfully so. But without question, without a doubt in my mind, Sergio Martinez to me is the fighter of the year. Uh, Stepping back from 2010, he was in a very what some considered the fight of the year last year between him and Paul Williams. Um, Action-packed fight. Martinez, it was almost like that fight was Martinez's. I don't want to say his coming out party, but it raised a lot of eyebrows. Um, with considering Paul Williams at that time was still heralded as the most dangerous fighter, or most avoided fighter, and I think he put that fight itself put it to rest because I mean he was just landing shots in that fight that were beautiful, man. And to me, I had seen Martinez prior, but I just think that fight really showed um, more obviously of his offense, but just like his style, man. Like I really became a fan of his after that fight. So after that fight, we skip over to 2010, and he goes and he fights the middleweight champion at the time, the dangerous Kelly Pavlik. Obviously everybody knows the story of Pavlik. Kid coming up 2006, 2007 goes and fights Jermaine Taylor and gives him his first loss and in devastating fashion with a seventh round knockout. Which in itself was a great fight too. He went from there, fought Taylor again, and went through a big speed bump, or not speed bump, but a little pothole in the street with Bernard Hopkins, and he was just outclassed by any sense of the word. And you know, he had some health issues with the staph infection. Went to go fight Paul Williams. That didn't happen. So now he goes in with Sergio Martinez, and it was a good fight in the very beginning. Pavlik knocked him down. Early on in the fight, Martinez was just landing very crisp punches, very accurate, good speed for middleweight, and he was throwing. He again, like, people always talk angles, quote unquote, but he was just hitting Pavlik with shots he didn't see coming, and obviously him being a southpaw didn't help the cause. So by the end of that fight, he was battering Kelly Pavlik almost to the point where I thought he was gonna take Pavlik out, but Pavlik's a strong dude, hung in there, and Martinez walked away with the middleweight title, man. Skip over a few months, and the fight everybody's calling for is the rematch with Paul Williams. I mean, that, there was talks of other fights being mentioned, but the only fight that made sense was with Paul Williams. And it was not highly promoted, but it was a big fight for boxing fans in general. Now, what that fight did for Sergio Martinez, again, speaking of that fight not getting a lot of publicity in the mainstream, in the sense, Martinez had his ESPN highlight, in that fight, knocking out Paul Williams in the second round, and really proving that he was, the better fighter that night, man. And really, he proved this point from the first fight. And I think that's something that is very, very commendable for any fighter, man, to come back from either a loss or, which was the case, but in more ways than the loss. It was really like a proving ground for Martinez to say, you know what, that last fight, I made mistakes. here's what's gonna happen now. And even in the beginning of that fight, you saw Williams getting really busy, getting you know, throwing at a high volume, but trying to keep Williams, trying to keep Martinez from trying to move. He was in front of him a lot of that time. But as I always say with Williams, is he gets too close for his height, man, and his reach. And Martinez took advantage of it, man, and he, without question, had the knockout of the year, And I think, without question, he's going to have knockout of the year, and I believe Ring Magazine is going to give him the fighter of the year. I mean, if he doesn't win and they give it to Pacquiao, I think that's a huge travesty, man. I mean, Pacquiao had a great year, don't get me wrong. I mean, he, beating Antonio Margarito and, beating Clottey in a very, lopsided victory, but not with a lot of action. At least not from Clottey, because it takes two to tango, and, he was just a punching bag that night. So, without question, man, Sergio Martinez gets my pick for fighter of the year. I think his stock went up very high. Like I said, man, he made the ESPN top plays. He was on, I believe he was on PTI. But I think he put himself on the map, and I think when you talk about pound-for-pound fighters, you got to put him at number 3. You have to. There's nobody there right now that has either the wins or really the notoriety right now that Martinez has, because when you mention Pacquiao and Mayweather, Martinez is like that. Obviously, they're talking about Marquez and Berto and Mosley for Pacquiao, but Martinez is like that little dark horse there that chances are those fights between him and Mayweather will never happen, or with Pacquiao. But his name is already being involved in any discussion having to do with any of those men. So you have to give it to him, because last year he wasn't. Come 2010, in a year, lots of things can change in boxing and really in sports in general. But mainly boxing, considering, big fights mean big things in the future for, whoever wins, or, a downside to whoever loses. But like I said, man, Martinez, much props to him, man. I really hope Ring Magazine doesn't rob his ass, but he deserves fighter of the year, man. So let me know what you think, or let me know who you think should be fighter of the year. I know Pacquiao is in the running, and I forgot who else they mentioned in there, because I think there's a top 3 or 4 that they picked from. But again, Martinez all the way, man. Knockout of the year, fighter of the year. Much props to him. Where he goes from here, I mean, like I said, I mentioned those guys, but I mean, if we're talking realistically, they're talking about the fight with P-Rog, man. I mean, and I like that. I really, really like that fight, but I understand why they are not making it yet. I think HBO needs to put this kid P-Rog in more fights, considering he beat a guy in Daniel Jacobs who was supposed to be the middleweight guy coming up, and he knocked him out, man. So I think the HBO, their responsibility is to get P-Rog in some fights, man, because he's an exciting kid. And I think by the end of next year, maybe in the beginning of next year, if Martinez is at a level where he stacks up a couple more wins, as well as P-Rog, that could be a big fight in 2012. If we're still here. So, but in any case, like I always say, man, hit the podcast up, the Rob Report Show, and hit up the blog, RobertoFlackChronicles.com. And for all the Twitter fans, Twitter.com/Roberto_Flack. And as I always say, subscribe, leave me comments, and I'll get back to you when I can, man. Peace.